Hello from Vienna. My name is Julia Haas and I'm with the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media, where we work, among other things, also on the safety of journalists and of female journalists, including online. In 2018, we produced a documentary together with the International Press Institute, IPI, which is called Our Dark Place, which highlights the experience of women journalists targeted with online violence and which will be shown at today's Wallenberg event. It's a great pleasure to have two excellent guests here with me today, Arzu Geybullayeva, an excellent journalist and media freedom advocate, and Javier Luque, the director of the documentary and head of digital communications at IPI. Arzu, you have been working with us on the project on the safety of female journalists online, SOFJO, from the very outset, and unfortunately, you have also experienced online harassment yourself as a journalist, as a woman journalist, and you have been also recently targeted with a new wave of online violence. Would you share with us your experience in that regard, including maybe the aim of such online attacks and whether and how they succeed in silencing? Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here. First of all, it's great to see you both. I guess I can start by really trying to differentiate between the two experiences that I've had. Really, I divide them really into, because what I've experienced in 2014, basically how I got involved with the SOFJO project, and what I've experienced more recently, I see them as two different experiences. They both are obviously under online harassment, because this is where it was happening on the social media platforms and whatnot. But I think there is a difference in the intensity of the two experiences, and just how much more targeted the most recent experience that I've had was. Just briefly, people who watched or will be watching the documentary will hear about my previous experience, so I won't dwell too much into that. But just to draw a parallel between the first experience, which was because of my work with a Turkish-Armenian newspaper, this time the attacks really kind of began during my coverage of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the second war that started on September 27th, and my views on the conflict. And when I say my views on the conflict, I try to cover the war, obviously objectively, to the best of my abilities as a journalist. Staying away from this military rhetoric that was very much used, especially among journalists representing both sides covering the conflict, but also trying to focus more on the common nuances between the two peoples, between the two communities, rather than the differences, and rather than what was setting us apart. And I wrote a couple of opinion pieces about it, but I also gave several interviews. And one of those interviews that was with a Turkish outlet, where I spoke with a Turkish journalist, and together with me being interviewed, there was a woman journalist from Armenia. And we talked about conflict-sensitive journalism, peace journalism between the two countries. And we were discussing various components of the conflict of the Second War, and how it was being received and covered in the two countries by the journalists in Armenia and Azerbaijan. And of course, we talked about some of the stories that were coming in particular, the presence of the foreign fighters, the coverage, the negative coverage, people's perceptions, propaganda, these kind of topics. And so I think that was the first wave. That was basically the trigger of the first wave of the attacks in this time around, because people didn't really like what I was saying. Even after I came and explained that, yes, in one of the expressions, I actually made a mistake because I was thinking in a different language and I was speaking in a different language, and it was a slip of a tongue, obviously, and that was not intentional, but it didn't really matter because it was completely repackaged and used as sort of the main reason of, how dare you say that Azerbaijan was not right in this war? How dare you say this? How dare you use this kind of expression? And similarly, they were referring to other other notes, other comments that I made during the interview. And that kind of started, and I was thinking that, okay, maybe it will take a week or two for people to quiet down, for it to cool down, because this is what you do when you're facing an attack. You kind of wait it out and try to look at it calmly. But it didn't stop. In fact, it just continued going. And I was really not aware of everything that was being discussed, to be honest with you. I was just getting messages from friends telling me that this particular person has written something about you and whatnot. And then the second part of the harassment this time around was this article that came through on a platform that is managed by some of the diaspora Azerbaijanis living abroad, targeting me over my picture on Instagram, which is my personal account, not related to work. In fact, I actually have a bio like that's, I'm saying out loud that this is personal account. It has nothing to do with the work that I do. But yes, so someone affiliated with the platform used my picture and accused me of disrespecting the country by posting a picture. The exact words were "for spreading my legs," because I was doing yoga and I was performing an asana. And they accused me of disrespecting my country for a while I was spreading my legs, exactly at noon, which was the time that was given to commemorate the soldiers who were killed during the Second War in a minute of silence. And that completely exploded. It was unbelievable. The wave that it triggered was, yeah, I as I'm still processing it all, and it's just really difficult to kind of explain how much impact it had, because you go to sleep, you look at your Instagram after blocking it, you look at it and you see 20 follower requests, and then you wake up in the morning and you see 1,000 follower requests after the story went up. It really triggers you in many ways, because you start thinking, well, how many follower requests will I have today, and will this continue, and do I completely go dark and just close all of my social media accounts and just don't say anything or be visible at all, or do I stay online? Like, there were so many different questions going through my mind. And what was really interesting was just how many people just kind of fed into that. They just kept on accusing and not asking, well, did you really actually post that picture at noon? Because I did not post that picture at noon. Yes, I took that picture in the morning of the day, but I posted it at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was not posted at noon. So I'm not going to go into further details, but it was just really interesting to see how, this time around, it was coming from all the platforms. It was on Twitter, it was on Instagram. I received emails. I had a phone call from a person who knows me very well, but was really mad at me for doing that interview with the Turkish paper. And a lot of these messages were also coming from people that I personally knew, that I once called friends, acquaintances, people that I thought had sense in them, really. But turns out that was not what they had. And I deactivated everything because I couldn't. It was just too much to handle. I deactivated my Facebook account, my Instagram account. I only kept Twitter because I really needed it for work, as I was still working and I was covering the conflict. And I reported all of what I could report on, especially to Twitter. But it was taking a really long time, and still I haven't received the feedback from the platform based on the reports that I made. There are some accounts who are still trolling me, even though I've reported them countless times. And they're not just, trolling me, but they are sending or mentioning me in very negative tweets that they're sending. And I, kind of decided to take a social media detox, because I needed time to think and also process and also figure out how I'm going to go forward with this. So this was quite an interesting experience this time around, just because how large it was, how targeted it was, and how long it took. I mean, still, even now, the war ended with a ceasefire that was signed, and still, I'm getting mentions or shout outs on social media platforms, and it's not. It didn't discourage me. I mean, you asked if it affected me. I mean, it didn't discourage me in a way that I wanted to stop my work. If anything, I wanted to keep writing and keep speaking about the conflict. But it did make me feel, how to say, just frustrated, extremely frustrated this time around. And the reason why I was so frustrated was also because I wasn't just targeted by random people. I was targeted by people that I knew, and I couldn't explain it. I couldn't find a reason for it, and that's what was really frustrating. Like, I was trying to understand what I've done wrong, but I haven't done anything wrong. But it just kept happening. So I'll end it there. It didn't really affect me. I still continued working. The only thing that I did do was to deactivate the social media accounts.
Thank you so much for sharing this story with us, and really, I think showing an example of the toll such an attack takes on your work and your personal life, and really the extended, it affects everything that you do on your daily life basis. So thank you very much for sharing it with us today. And also the different patterns. So you mentioned that it was different this time around than the last time, and that it like spread and became more broad in that way. So maybe Javier, I know that you personally, but also IPI was very active, or is very active on addressing digital safety of journalists and women journalists. So maybe can you give us a little bit of information about your initiatives and these overall patterns that you have also been working on, how online attacks take place, and what that actually means for journalism and media freedom?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And yeah, it was really impactful again to hear the account of Arzu, which I was able to actually film a couple of years ago for the film. And then actually her words and her story reminded me again of one of the main lessons that I learned throughout not only filming, this documentary, but also doing research and interviewing women journalists since 2014, which is that most of them, not all of them, but most of them, they don't see themselves as victims, actually, because, they wake up every morning, besides just like Arzu does, and keep writing, keep working, because they know that, their work, it's not only for themselves, but it has a public, service to it. But they also don't want to be seen as heroes. And also because, being a hero or just having a journalist, that the only, tool or the only thing left for her, to be a journalist and to work as a journalist is an heroic act, that actually tells very, very little about the democratic values and the safety mechanisms that are in place in a specific country or, in a specific region. Maybe we can talk about that later on as well. But you were talking about patterns. Here we've seen, well, first of all, the patterns have evolved a lot since the movie was filmed. Like, the attacks remain the same. The patterns has not changed that much, but let's say that have been refined in the sense that before, in 2018, 2017, 16, you could see how, most of the times populists or specific, public figures linked to autocratic regimes would actually target the person and the name of the person specific to it, right? Now, and then encourage in the tweet or in the message on social media to encourage their followers, to actually spread and disseminate the attack against the journalist. Now they don't need to call their their acolytes, to disseminate and further, the message. They just need to put it out and then implicitly invite all the rest of the people to actually share it. The important thing is also to mention here that a lot of usually the attacks go against renowned women journalists, because that also sends a chilling effect to freelancers, to journalists who are just starting, to young journalists who are still in the university, because the message that they send is that, listen, if we can do that to a journalist like that, and we can have that impact, on the life and the psychological, well-being of a person, just imagine what we cannot do to you, right? So try to behave, try not to report courageously. So this is a very important thing that they do, and they do it through two different types of techniques or strategies. One is through intimidation, meaning that threats, rape threats, threats against their relatives, but also through, and this is the case of Arzu, for example, and the case of many other journalists, women journalists as well, is through the smearing, the discrediting their work. Because if they discredit their work, then if they discredit the journalist, if you discredit the person, you then discredit their work, therefore, what they've reported, it does not have the value that it should have in principle.
Thank you very much for outlining these two sides, but also really the level, like the impact it has really, as you mentioned, on democratic discourse, and really the question of access to information and whose voices are kind of like getting out there and enabling society to make well-informed decisions and really getting the full pictures. Thank you for that. Maybe now briefly also, Arzu, you have already mentioned before, briefly touched upon that you like went off all social media for yourself to now process it and figure out how to address the issues. I think it would also be very valuable for us to hear how you personally, or like a bit more about how you personally find this courage to really continue with your work and with journalism, and to escape kind of the dark place that this online harassment has put you in.
Thank you. I very much echo what Javier said about how we see ourselves. I don't see myself as a hero. I don't see myself as a victim. I see myself as a journalist. And not even, putting a gender hat, just a human, right? A human being. And for me, that's what really matters in this work, is that I'm as a human being trying to address other humans' interests by writing stories, or at least by expressing different opinions maybe, or bringing stories to the audience. But what is interesting is with these attacks, you're taken out of that human skin and you're turned into an object with a face and with a name, and that people just feel the necessity almost to come after you. It almost, in this particular case, it felt like it gave more credibility to those who were coming after me, because if they didn't, they would have be left out from the community of this group mentality, right? This herd mentality. And this was very much one of the interesting features of this particular experience that I had this time around. And I tried to, like in previous times, I tried to understand who the people were. And this is why when I was answering the first question, I tried to also mention who the people were who were coming after me, people who I considered friends, people I respected from civil society, people that I looked up to or whose articles I've read, and understanding that this is, again, part of this herd mentality, that it's easier to be of the with like the popular opinion, which is Arzu is a bad journalist, let's discredit her and let's go after her because she's not right in what she's saying, was much easier than saying, well, wait a second, what she's actually saying does make sense. Why don't we ask other responsible institutions to actually address these questions that she's raising? But that putting that aside, so going after these individuals, trying to understand who these people are who are coming after me. How can I make sure that this doesn't happen again? Going offline was a way to prevent others from coming after me, not these specific individuals that I actually had personal relationships with. Dealing with that is a very different experience that I have not had before. And I'm still trying to understand, how do I go forward? Do I completely cut my relations with these people? Do I distance myself temporarily? Do I give them time and maybe hope that one day they'll understand and they'll come back and we'll have some kind of dialogue? I don't really believe in the latter. Right now, I'm very much practicing no communication whatsoever with many of these individuals, which is extremely hard because, again, these are the people that I considered as sources sometimes as well for stories. Just today, one of my stories came out where I actually interviewed several of the people that I'm no longer speaking with, precisely because of their harassment of me or their messages about me and about the people who thought the same way about this war and about the implications of this war. So, you know, trying to differentiate this and trying to understand how to deal with it on different levels is how I've been coping with this in this particular case. Also, like I've done previously, documenting, taking screenshots, saving links. This time around, several times I tried to explain what I was going through via short tweets, or there was an article that I wrote that was actually also based on a post that I had on Instagram, the Face of an Enemy, it was titled, and my editor asked me if I would actually write a longer story about it. But eventually I realized that the depth of this harassment was not really getting through to the people in Azerbaijan. So I actually took all of that and I put it into an album and I put it on Facebook. And this is when there was this wow moment that, wait a second, this is actually much bigger than we thought. And look at the people who are commenting, like, this guy is a philosopher at a university in Germany. This is a well-known musician, or, you know, it really kind of brought to the attention, not just the fact that I was being harassed in this way, I was being targeted in this way, I was being discredited in this way, not just the language, but also who those people were. And I think that was, and is, in my opinion, perhaps a new way of addressing harassment, especially when it comes to this distinction of intimidation versus discrediting, and which was in my case, discrediting the work that I was doing, or the work that I've done in the past, and trying to say, well, actually, these are the people who are discrediting the work, and look at the work that they're producing. What are they saying? Are they really going with what they're preaching, or are they also spreading false information, which they have been doing until now? Or are they sharing propaganda, or are they sharing nationalist rhetoric? Like, what's this distinction? So that's been really interesting to kind of watch come out of it as a result. And one other way of dealing with it, I mean, I had a lot of questions when this first wave started after the interview. I thought whether or not to actually ask for help, whether attention would help in really kind of quieting the noise. And I decided not to. I was like, okay, this has happened. I will deal with it. It has happened before, not the first time. But when the Azlogos article came out, when this particular story about with using my Instagram picture came out, I realized that this time around, getting the help would actually help me personally to feel not alone. It's just, you know, no matter how much support you get from friends, you still feel like you're just squeezed and you're completely alone against this army of haters. And yeah, it really helped to reach out to European Federation of Journalists and work on a statement, and then just, yeah, work with other organizations like IPI as well to receive so much support. And that just, yeah, that just helped tremendously. So in terms of processing and moving forward, I feel like when you're faced with with online harassment, and you feel like, you know, whether having attention, having international support of media freedom organizations or organizations that work on safety of journalists, whether or not it would be damaging or whether or not be helpful, I think it's really good to ask those questions and maybe even consult with people who work at these organizations. Just really, you know, I had this back and forth with a friend of mine who works at one of the organizations. I actually asked her whether, you know, I had the right to ask for this kind of notice, because I felt like, you know, I just know these people anyway, and I can always ask for help, but there's so many other journalists who are in much tougher position, and maybe I shouldn't be taking their space. And so there's also this guilt inside. And, you know, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who feels this guilt, because, you know, I speak with people like you, I speak with people like Javier, I know I've kind of like within the circle. And so I always feel like, well, maybe that's not my place. Like someone else should be in the light, you know, being addressed, those issues being addressed. But this time around, it just really felt that I needed it in terms of, yeah, just also, yeah, realizing that I'm not, I really am not a traitor, that my work is my work, and that it is considered credible work, and that people do consider it accurate, and it's not some kind of, you know, story about, yeah, it's not some kind of nationalist story. So yeah, it's been an interesting, again, like, you know, speaking of patterns and speaking of context, like when Javier was speaking, I was thinking that the patterns, they're different, but the context is still the same. I was targeted yet again in a similar political debate. You know, this was related to the conflict. This was related to a conflict between two countries. And my position was once again used as a pretext to come after me. It's just, you know, 6 years later, completely in a different setting, especially, you know, with the war setting, which completely, I think, amplified the whole situation. Had it not been war, first of all, I don't think I would have been targeted again this much. But because it was war, because it's so near and dear to people from the both countries, it was much bigger.
Thank you so much. I mean, there were so many levels in there that we should continue to discuss in more detail. I think, I mean, reflecting on your, like, how you deal with it, I think it was very important to also, as you outlined, that each person, each individual in each situation also needs a different response. And I think that is very important when we address this, to really say, like, what is which actor's role and how can we support the journalist that is targeted in this specific situation, in the specific context that the person is in. But of course, like, all your documenting and reaching out has been incredibly important also for organizations such as ours and others to really be able to understand the extent and to understand the level and so on. So maybe just briefly, Javier, as we're already kind of running out of time, when you were working on the documentary, or also in addition to that, do you have any other, like, what surprised you when it comes to coping mechanisms or to strengthening resilience of journalists who really decide to speak up instead of letting them being silenced? Is there anything else in addition to the many aspects that Arzu already mentioned that you would want to highlight?
Well, first of all, we need to highlight that you know, that the journalist does not sit in a vacuum, meaning, you know, they have organizations surrounding them. In the case of of Arzu, she had a network of press freedom advocates, people who are sensitive around this issue, because we've been working together very closely. But it's also important to highlight that this is not only her case, but every journalist, they have a first layer of defense, and that would be newsrooms. And both for freelancers who work as a freelance for newsrooms should also take care, of their freelancers, not only their staff, employees. And this is important to mention, because as this first line of defense, these newsrooms have to have a protocol in place. Most of them are aware of the issue, but most of them, they don't have a specific step-by-step action plan to cope with certain, with these cases. They do it, in implementing ad hoc measures in each one of the cases. But these protocols are not only important, for the newsrooms, or to solve or support, these specific journalists, but also to send a message, throughout all the newsrooms, throughout all the journalists working in the newsrooms, that they take these kind of attacks seriously, and that it's also a way to invite them to come forward, and to report these attacks, because over and over and over again, what we're seeing is how journalists, they feel that, this type of attacks come along with the job, and that who are themselves, while, to report about it, while there are like many other journalists working in a very dire circumstances, when the important thing is that, look, listen, if this impacts, your life to the level of taking a break, self-censoring yourself. I'm not talking about the case of ours, of course, but there are others, who have been through all these feelings, of I'd rather not touch, this topic, at least for a couple of months until things calm down and so on. By doing that, it's not only an impact on the journalist or on the newsrooms and the credibility of the newsrooms as well, but also impacts every single one of us as citizens, because we will not be able, to have access to the information, to the perspective, and to the views of those journalists who try to report independently and critically. So I think that from IPI perspective, we're working with newsrooms to implement protocols to actually work on that. And just very quickly, and I know that we're running, but there's one thing that I want to touch upon what Arzu said, that it was really important, which is the credibility and the intellectual and educational background that, the trolls or the people who disseminated this fake news have. Therefore, if these people are sharing this information, therefore they might, have a reason behind it. And that's the dangerous part, right, Arzu?
Yeah.
And the thing is that one thing that we noticed, and that has been an evolution since 2018 when we released the documentary, is that it has already started before, but politics and everyone who's attached to politics have increasingly and exponentially become something about feelings and passions, not conflicting argument or reasoning anymore. And well, we're recording this not even 24 hours after the storm on the Capitol Hill in the United States. So we see what happens on social media, can actually have an impact not only on the life of women journalists, men journalists, but also in every single one of us as human beings who support, a democratic values.
Thank you so much for outlining this. I think it's really important that in 2021, at least, we managed to see that online and offline is really the same, and there is no no difference between it. And thank you also for outlining the role of news outlets. So maybe now in closing, Arzu, would you also want to highlight maybe like one important actor or one recommendation that you would have for a specific actor to say how Because we know, as it was mentioned so many times now, that really everybody has to play a role in addressing the issue, because it affects everybody and it goes beyond the issue of journalism. It goes beyond the issue of gender equality. It's really an issue of how societies can live together and can make decisions. And it should really not be up to a woman journalist or a journalist to decide whether he or she is able to be encouraged or to be silenced. What would be your kind of like one recommendation to an actor to ensure a better safety of women journalists online?
Sure. I mean, I think in all of this, the main, what I'm looking for personally is accountability. And for this, it falls on basically the shoulders of several actors. We're talking about, if I'm working with a newsroom, then it falls on the shoulders of a newsroom, but not only, because this harassment comes via platforms. The platforms have the same responsibility. And I'm really tired of hearing platforms excuses when they have discussions around these issues, and not just about online harassment, but in general, when it comes to accountability of social media platforms. Sort of, yes, we're working on this, but it's not. With the role that social media platforms are playing today, there needs to be a mechanism within these organizations. I don't know if it's an oversight board like Facebook is putting together or has put together. I don't know if it's another focal group or a focus group, whatever it is. They carry responsibility because this is happening on their platforms. And therefore, when I send a request to Twitter requesting that this user needs to be blocked, or this user's account needs to be taken down, I cannot wait for 3 weeks for them to get back to me, because that user keeps accusing me and keeps discrediting me, which means he's taking away the platform that I have where I can raise my voice. And that is an issue. So newsrooms, social media platforms. And finally, I think my number one goal this year is to actually seek justice on a legal ground. And so having legal mechanisms that are open to address harassment that takes place online is needed. So if I am going to take anyone to court based on the things that they've done and said online against me, there needs to be a ground for that. And I think this is one of the sort of biggest encouragements that I could make, is that to have this kind of institutional and legal support within the countries where we are, because I'm certainly never going to be able to win a case in Azerbaijan, but I am hopeful that I could probably at least have a case in a foreign country. And a lot of it, of course, depends on the laws in that country and then the judiciary in that country. And so having this assistance, having this support, it's not even assistance, having this mechanism in place is extremely important. And then at the end of the day, also having a personal backup, a community that is supporting. None of what I've been through would be easy to go through if I didn't have the community that I have, if I didn't have the network that I have. And so I think that's another thing, is like we talk a lot about self-care, and 2020 and the pandemic was a lot about self-care. I think really in this particular case, self-care is extremely important and should not be overlooked. Just kind of like shrugging this off and saying, well, I'm a journalist, this happens all the time, I can deal with it. Actually, no, you can't. Like it really has repercussions. And I think this is really important to also add to a list of accountability actors and accountability measures that one can take.
Thank you so much. I think it's really kind of summarized that there is not this one way to find a solution, but it's really an effort that we all need to share, and the role that everybody has to play. So in that regard, I would just like to briefly also mention that the OSCE RFM has recently published a resource guide, which really tries to capture all these different actors and who should be doing what, and how to really provide a little bit more resources and actions that should be taken. If you're interested, you can find it on our website, so osce.org/FOM for freedom of media /SOFJO. And with that, I really just want to thank the two of you. Thank you so much, Arzu. Thank you so much, Javier, for joining me here today. And thank you also, of course, to the Wallenberg Civil Courage Society for putting this very timely and still, unfortunately, very persistent issue on the agenda, and for showing the documentary, which hopefully will help to raise awareness and thereby hopefully inspire change. So thank you very much and have a good day.